So, I thank our guests to have allowed me to introduce them in a different way than traditionally. So, whatever they want to say about themselves, they're going to say it afterwards. But I'd like to introduce you differently to them and around their life experience. And I'm going to ask you to imagine, as the song was saying. So imagine that you were born in a place which is about war. You don't know anything about else than war. There's war all around you. And that is actually your understanding of life until the age of 18. And you happen to be passionate by media, by films, by documentaries, and you get the chance to go to a country where you have the opportunity to study and to learn about this knowledge. And 18 years later, you still didn't go back to you're still outside of your country. You actually even have a little child who has never met your family, because all of your family is still back there. Imagine what you can go through. So you're not just going to have to imagine, but you're going to be listening. So please welcome Imad Karam. Thank you, Imad. And that gives me the opportunity to give a warm please, Imad, wherever you want. And a warm welcome, thank you to Imad and to Kelly for last night, for their beautiful documentary. So, imagine that you're actually born at the opposite, in a space, in a place where you actually have a lot of wealth. And that's your reference. That's your reference to where material is not an issue, and actually your family have been doing amazing things in this world around bringing banking into the Middle East and other countries. And this is your world of reference, and you actually engage in that environment, in that family. Your grandfather in the beginning of the last century started this amazing movement, and that while you are imagining, we're having a problem with the microphone, is that right? Mic's good, good. So Mark is too. So imagine that while you are in that environment, your dream, what you're looking at is, how am I going to involve in that environment? And you're fascinated by communication, social responsibility. But one day, you learn that your father, who's the CEO of this big group, decides to stop for ethical reasons. He doesn't want to continue to nourish the system. And he stops what has been going on for generations. And you become lost. Identity, who am I? What am I going to do? And you discover that actually, after going through difficult times around identity, that there's a way that you could be serving. And one of the ways is bringing financial literacy to young people, to learn how to be in relation with money, what is in this energy. So please welcome Dina Showman. Thank you, Dina. So I'm still wondering where our other guest is. Is Boris here, or? There you are, there. Playing hide and seek, so thank you. So, imagine that you are born just before the war.
Goodbye, baby May.
That was interesting. I don't know if that was the music of that time, but imagine that you were born during the war, and actually when you were 3, you see your father leave the war and you never see him again. And at the age of 6, your mother leaves and you're never going to see her again, but you don't know that. But all that you know is that you're condemned. You know every day that your life is hanging on a string. And that actually during the war, they try and catch you, but you escape, and you manage to survive. And later you discover, not because they told you, because it's an evidence that all your family have been killed during war. And that at the age of 11, you realize, you understand that the man who created this war was mentally ill, and you decide that you don't want this to happen again, and you want to become a doctor, you want to become a psychiatrist, so that this doesn't happen again. And not only does he become a psychiatrist, but an ethologue as well, and a neuroscientist, and one of the top specialists in resilience on our planet today. Please welcome Boris Cyrulnik. So it takes a bit longer from up there. Thank you, Boris. Please have a seat. So let's continue to imagine. So imagine that you're actually serving your life through transmitting empathy to children, and that you're really connected to resilience, but actually you didn't necessarily live suffering or trauma, but you were transmitted by your parents, by your grandparents, this quality of resilience because they lived resilience. They lived deep suffering, but actually had such a way of being, keeping their dignity despite the challenges they've gone through, that it's been deeply inspiring and has nourished you to an extent that you want to transmit this to the new generations. And that today, this is what you're doing in schools with children and babies with roots of empathy. Please welcome Mary. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary Gordon. So, imagine that when you're born, actually, you're going to have some very deep eyesight challenges, and actually, which will progressively go to be towards being genetically blind. But you don't know that because your family decide to not talk to you about it, but you discover it when you're 17 years old. And at 17 years old, you realize that your dream in those days to have a driving license will never be possible. And that you discover that you haven't been told about this, but you know that your eyesight is going to go down and down during your whole life. So imagine the challenges around that, and imagine that you discover that actually on our planet there's over 1 billion people who are disabled, all forms of disabilities, and that you decide that you want the leaders, particularly in the working spaces, to actually include disability. And while going through this challenge of losing your eyesight, that actually there's another challenge, which is what does it mean in terms of all of my relations, and the fact that during 17 years, I actually was not aware that what I was not seeing wasn't just wasn't everybody's reality, but actually was only my reality. And imagine what that can bring. Please welcome Caroline Cassie. Thank you, Caroline. So, thank you so much for being here. Preparing this panel has been quite amazing for me because I consciously decided that I didn't want us to have big meetings all together. So despite you two, who knew yourselves before, they practically don't know each other. So what they are going to be sharing with you, they are going to be discovering among themselves. And this is also so that we can afterwards listen to them. They're probably going to have questions among themselves. So what I'd like to do first is to honor their presence. And let's just take 30 seconds of silence to be with us. Thank you. So what we've decided, so I say we, because even though we didn't meet before, we did manage to take a collective decision a few minutes before, which means a lot, I think, because taking decisions together is definitely one of the challenges for communities. But we're going to start more about very personally, but actually just before the very personally, we're going to take the benefit of having Boris Cyrulnik with us, who's going to first, before each one talk about themselves, Boris is going to give us a bit of a context. And I've known actually Boris Cyrulnik for 20 years now, but I've never heard him talk about what he's going to talk. And this is about neuroscience and spirituality. So, thank you, Boris, and we're all ears.
Thank you very much. I'm amazed and very happy to be with you here and talking about how neurology, as a neurologist and psychiatrist, I will try to explain how neurology and sociology can articulate to make spirituality. I don't know what means harmony within myself, but I don't know why sometimes I feel peaceful with myself and yourself. As a neurologist, I think about attachment theory, and I believe that when a baby is left alone and is not securely attached with an attachment figure, his mother, its father, or somebody else, he has got a neuro-emotional factor of vulnerability. And this vulnerability is imprinted in its brain, and now we can photograph this circuit of vulnerability. Because the two prefrontal lobes are atrophic. When the baby is left alone, the two prefrontal lobes are atrophic, the limbic system is atrophic, and the amygdala, here, not here but here, the amygdala is very hypertrophic. That means that each stimulation is for such a baby like an aggression. The baby is afraid when you smile to the baby, he's afraid. Because for him, for such a development, each information is like an attack. I think that when a baby is well surrounded, he has got a factor of protection. And when he smiles, and when you smile, the baby is very happy to stay with you. But when the mother is not here, or when a substitute is not here, it's possible to start again another kind of development, and that is called resilience. It's not the development, the usual development. It's another good development with a substitute. But it's possible. But when a baby, about 10 months, is left alone after having been isolated for a long time, he has got this prefrontal dysfunction, and he acquires an insecure, avoidant attachment. And he shows a distrust as his mother goes away, and he has not great reaction when his mother comes back. Such child has learned an insecure attachment, and when he is self-centered and he exhibiting his place and in exploration within to directed to himself. Sometimes he has got an ambivalent attachment, 15%, and he is very distressed when he is left alone, but when his mother comes back, he bites his mother, he kicks his mother, because he is in huge need. He needs an important attachment, but he is not capable to ask for attachment, to search for attachment. And such a child expresses anger with its mother and with everyone else. And such a child works to remain alone. And some 5% of all population of children are disorganized children, and because they were left alone without any substitute. So we can access with spirituality when we become able to represent something that is not perceptible, that is not sensible, that is not in our context. A secure child, when his mother is not here in his context, remains secure because he thinks about a mother impossible to see. His mother is away and the child remains secure. Conversely, when a child has got an insecure attachment, he needs his mother or a substitute constantly in his context. He is not able to represent somebody else which is not here in its context. He needs his mother in its context. He is not capable of spirituality because he is not capable to feel securely attached to somebody who is not in his context. Such a child has acquired a disharmonic style of attachment. So your second question, what practices might we foster to celebrate our difference? Most of us here in this room are delighted in celebrating difference, because difference for us is the pleasure of an exploration, discovering another country, another language, another mental world, and another belief. It's a pleasure, it's a belief. But others, certainly not in this room, are afraid of discovering another world, another mental health, another language. And the first practices never leave a baby, never leave a child alone. It's the main way to make him become insecure, disorganized attachment, incapable of believing of spirituality. Apart from, in a general population, 2 out of 3 children learn a secure attachment, giving the pleasure of exploration. Apart from the USA, where since a decade, a baby of 10 months old have been evaluated at 51% of secure attachment instead of 66%. And maybe this evaluation, this explanation of such a shrink is that the American culture is relentless, sprinting, running fast as soon as awakened, without never meditation, never, always sprinting. That is possible in English to sprint?
Sprinting. Do we say sprinting in English? To run very fast? To sprint.
Yes.
Yeah, we do.
It's not an English word, sprint.
To sprint. It probably is originally sprinting from the English, yeah.
And this explanation is when we are looking alone at screens, we are alone before a screen, and days and night, and even in such a context, in such an education, the baby, a child, learns to speak like a Kalashnikov. He speaks like Osprint. And he doesn't hesitate, he doesn't breathe, he isn't with attention for the other, he is self-centered. We should, that a child is beloved, we learn a pleasant way of living, but when we are alone, we are running, growing hormones, and sexual hormones are shrinking, and even our body is disabled. When we are left alone without attachment, our biology is modified. But the trend is not. This trend is not a fate. How might spiritual resilience help sustain relationships and harmony? But we human beings are able to suffer twice. The first one, when we are hurt by a real blow, and the second one, when we think about the blow and try to give it, to remember the blow and to think always about the blow we received. We are living both in reality and a representation of this reality, perceptions and imaginations, sensitivity and beliefs. And the way we feel our representation is stained with our style of attachment. An insecure child may turn God into a substitute of attachment figure. But when we speak, we are able to make present something which is impossible to perceive, but it is possible to represent. And in both cases, we feel what we perceive and what we represent. It is a representation. But I think that spirituality is not religion. Spirituality is a feeling, a search of meaning related to sacred, invisible strength, and many people are not religious. After a terrorist attack in Paris, a lot of people were in search of meeting somebody believing in the same God and in the same representation. 70% of this traumatized population report a search of affiliation and attending religious services. But spirituality is more in transcendence of human people, but without somebody who protects us, and this somebody has not name. But religions is more close to coping, meeting others, loving some God or loving somebody else who secure us. But in fact, religion and spirituality can overlap. The first is perceiving a brother as a secure base. The second one is feeling somebody else as a representation. But life is not a chess party. The first place gives the direction, but so long as the party is not ended, there are a lot of pretty strokes to play, and it's the hope.
Thank you, Boris. So thank you for giving this context around childhood and attachment, because of course we all can relate to that depending what childhood we had and whether we felt secure or not when we were a child. So I think this is a good basics to now start about ourselves and our childhoods. And I'm wondering, Boris, if you would be willing to continue and actually talk about your childhood. And as I introduced you, I introduced the challenging childhood you had. And if you could tell us maybe a bit about, as you did have the first 3 years of your life with your parents and maybe did live some secure attachments, but then it's completely vanished away. And you even told me that even after the war was even more difficult. So if you'd be willing to share with us a bit.
Yes, I was born in Bordeaux, in the south of France, before the Second World War. I am Jew, and my father comes from Ukraine, and my mother comes from Poland. My father joined the French army as soon as the war in 1939, and I could never see him later. I remained alone with my mother because all the men of my family were in the French army, young men and women were in the resistance, and the other were already in Auschwitz. And I was left alone with my mother until she had been arrested in 1942. And I was put in an institution and hidden by a family of Christian. But I was arrested in a night in 1944 by the German army and the French police. And I was put in jail and sentenced to death, and I was 6.5. But I don't know why I could escape. And I was protected by a series of just. You can translate just?
Do we see the justs?
Just in the Bible, there is somebody who in the Bible, when...
Samaritans? Good Samaritans? Is that what you mean?
Is it the Samaritans? I'm not sure.
Somebody who protects somebody else and make him alive, save all the humanity, and he is called a just in the Bible. And it was impossible for me to go to school because in school I would be arrested and put in jail and sent to Auschwitz. So after the war, I was illiterate, and I couldn't read, I couldn't, and even I was illiterate and even in difficulty to speak because I was left alone until 10. But when later, when I heard that Hitler and the Nazi were insane people, I decided that I was due to become a psychiatrist to prevent from war. So I made studies, and it was the starting point of my own resilience. It was not very easy, but it is possible. It was not easy. And so, when I became a psychiatrist, I was afraid of the way of our culture were in charge of insane. And I decided that resilience would become a scientific research. And now currently, I am directing 4 or 5 groups of research about resilience since 40 years.
Thank you, Boris. So I'm sure that brings up a lot of questions, such an amazing journey, but we're going to go through now. Maybe Imad, could be the next one sharing about your journey, please.
Good morning. I guess we don't choose who we're born to. We don't choose where we're born. And that's the beginning of our lives. We grew up only looking back at those choices that were made for us by either parents or circumstance. I've just been listening and reflecting that long as we don't become prisoners to those experiences, they do influence us, they do motivate us, they do make us who we are, but there is a very fine line for me where some of us would manage to free themselves up from being prisoners to that, to their childhood, to their adolescent life. So the other thought I'll just start with is I'm always amazed by our human ability to adapt. And I guess that's resilience. I've only learned the word resilience recently. I grew up with the word resistance. But I've learned the word resilience recently, and I was talking to my wife about the difference between the two the other day. But adapting is something that I feel is built into our system. We're born with that quality to adapt, and then it is enhanced through life, through experiences, through training, and we keep upgrading it, if you like. Some of us better than others. I was born in a beautiful old city on the Mediterranean called Gaza, which is today not as beautiful or not as happy as I remember it. 42 years ago, I am a second child to 2 parents who've ended up having 10 children. I'm second born. Reflecting on the theme about difference, I think it's just been with me from the beginning, even before I became aware of the conflict. I remember my father had issues with his brothers about land and inheritance, and they would be fighting. It was always there. I grew up with that sense of challenge and conflict within the family. Then I would be playing in the streets, which was normal in Gaza, with other kids. But then at the age of 7, I think, I went to school. And then I found that my mates or my friends in the street did not go to the same school. I asked my parents or their parents, why do they go to another school and why they dress in a different dress code than mine? And I was told these are refugees. What is a refugee? Oh, they're Palestinians, but they're kicked out from their homes in what is now Israel. And they're refugees, and they make up about 70% of the population of Gaza. And they get aid and support from something called UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency. And so they go to school until they're 18, and then we go together to university. So I grew up with that, if you like, difference within. They went to a different school, they came from a different culture within. When I finished my school, there was another lot of Palestinians who came to Gaza in 1994, who came back from diaspora, came back with the PLO. Some of you would know a little bit of the history. But thousands came back with the Oslo Peace Agreement, which started by, it was called Gaza and Jericho first. Those were the years of possibilities for peace. Up until then, I lived as a child under occupation. I had to ask, who are these people who are, it was the army basically, who were patrolling the streets, imposing curfew on us, throwing tear gas at our school as kids. I was 11 when the first Intifada broke, which was characterized by stones, kids throwing stones at the soldiers. But then the checkpoint that was on the street between my home and my school, suddenly, which I had to experience every single day for so many years, I never imagined would go away. In 1994, it was dismantled and it was gone. At that point, I was finishing high school, and there was this whole talk about peace. We were celebrating, we went out to the streets, and sadly, things then went down again a few years later. Now, I went to university in Gaza. I learned English by accident. I went for an English department. It's another story, but it was accidental that I ended up studying English. And then I worked initially for the Palestinian Authority in the field of communications and media, which took me to the United States for a training organized by the United Nations, which was an eye-opener to the world. Up until then, I've never left Gaza. I think I would have been 24 at that point. Now, as I say, we find ourselves living the lives we're given, and we all kind of try to influence it as we grow. And it was by chance that I met Initiatives of a Change in Gaza, and that has really influenced my life. This was before I came to the UK. And Initiative to Change, when it was introduced to me, it was, some of you saw the film last night, it was the 4 moral standards. If you want to change society, start with yourself, look at the mirror and measure yourself against those qualities of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. I did the test and I passed at 100%. I thought, yeah, I'm good. I'm honest, I'm pure, I'm loving. Let's go and change society. It was only when I went a year later to the UK that I discovered that it's not the case. And what it means, it's really looking inwards and looking at relationships as well, starting by putting right what is not in your life. So I started looking back at my family life and my own relationships with my uncles, who I grew up feeling a sense of resentment because of their relationship and how they treated my parents. The money I used to take away from the family, or when I was working as an adult, using public office, if you like, for personal gains, which is very normal in that context, cultural context, but it's not right. So I've started putting certain things right in my life. But the most important thing is an invitation, that sense, that deep sense within me that there's a purpose for my life. And while my parents naturally wanted me to be just like any other one who gets a job and gets a wife and buys a piece of land and have many kids, I just felt I was different. And that invitation to look at my life and that I exist for a purpose has really helped me think and look for a vision for myself. And again, being accompanied by initiatives of a change has helped a lot in that sense. Circumstantially, the situation back home went from bad to worse. And it's a constant challenge for me. I think I just want to bring it to maybe spirituality and resilience. Maybe my time is coming to a close. Many Palestinians die for Palestine and have died for Palestine. I just had the thought one day, how can I live for Palestine rather than die for Palestine? What would that look like? How can I be good for myself, at the same time being good for my family, good for my people, good for my region, and good for the world? There shouldn't be any contradiction. Good for one should be good for all. How can that happen? Questions. The feelings of guilt, if you like. You're away from your family. You're trying to start your own family. You cannot visit them. How do you reconcile that with the deep sense of commitment to finding peace? I was really moved this morning by the message from the children at the end of the presentation. No child should suffer. Nobody should die just because somebody else decides to pull the trigger. How can we find that humanity in us? Where has it gone? I live with that lack of harmony, if you like, or that search for a sense of how do we make the world a better place? It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're all called to make the world a better place, and that's my personal mission. So just to finish off on the spirituality bit, I felt that in my own journey, it has helped me a lot, having a religion, if you like, as part of my life, and having my own spirituality. Having left home to the UK, it was a quite interesting experience. You come out of the box and you start looking from outside. So one of the things I looked at was that when you're born into a faith, into a religion, it really becomes a habit, a ritual. You lose the connection, the deeper connection. So how do we not lose that deeper connection and deeper meaning? Religion is there for a meaning, for a purpose, and it has helped me with my journey of acceptance. So how do I accept? And I just want to finish with where I started. So part of it for me is to accept who I am, who I was born to, where I was born. So accepting that, because otherwise you're carrying it on your shoulders all the time. So that was a freeing experience, to accept my parents for who they are, my people for who they are, and at the same time having that sense of faith and your spirituality helping, energizing you to make the difference, to change what you can change and what can be changed, but at the same time accepting what is outside of your control and what you cannot change, so that one can channel one's energy, hopefully, towards a positive path. And that's what my mission is. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. very much. Dina, please share with us your journey. And there's going to be a few slides here, so maybe we'll give a sign to the technical people. Maybe you have it.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Good morning. After these stories, I feel so humbled to even share the stage with these amazing people and getting to know them, some of them also since yesterday. I'm not used to speaking about myself, so I have some notes and things so I don't forget to mention some details, which I often forget. So please bear with me. And I do have a few pictures to share about my story. So my name is Dina, and I'm from Jordan. And I was born to a banking family, but not just a family of bankers, as you heard. My great-grandfather, let's see, who's on your left, was born in Beit Hanina, Palestine in 1890, and he decided to leave to the US when he was about, I want to say 22, to discover the world and build himself. He became a door-to-door salesman and eventually built his own textile business and had a warehouse, now only a couple of blocks from where I live in New York, I discovered recently. Before he left, he was married and my grandfather was born, and he stayed in Palestine at that time because he wanted him to learn Arabic, and he didn't meet him for many, many years. When my grandfather was about 13 or 14, he summoned him to the US because he wanted his son with him. And that's the first time they met. My grandfather boarded a ship at the age of 13 or so with only a picture of his father to meet his father for the first time in the US. Working in the US, he saw how banking worked, and he really got interested in the concept and wanted to bring that back to the Arab world. So that's what he decided to do. He left and established a bank in 1930 with a few other investors who believed in the concept, and called it Arab Bank. And I want to read a quote about the reason why he called it Arab Bank, which I wear on a bracelet that my sister made me, that has a picture of my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father. And it's actually backwards, but let me see. It says, when I decided to establish the bank, I did not wish to give it my name or that of my village, Beit Hanina, or my country, Palestine, but I gave it the name of my nation and my greater homeland. I called it Arab Bank. And I think I wanted to mention that because I feel like I grew up with these stories, and I feel like that really framed the way I thought and thinking of things in a bigger way. So I heard many stories growing up, although I used to be very bored with them at the time, and I really hated banking, anything to do with money, and I actually even hated my family for a long time. I always felt, we spoke a little bit, Mark and I, on some of the calls, I never felt like I really belonged in this environment and family. Today, I definitely appreciate it, and it shaped who I am. So I used to hear stories about how, a small loan and all the personal stories and friendships that my grandfather fostered building the bank helped so many people grow big countries, helped finance infrastructures of countries that were developing at that time, helped communities, and even in times of conflict, always made sure that people with deposits got their money back no matter where they were. So banking at that time used to be different in those days. It was more personal, and there was much more trust, I feel. And so I grew up with my family being the bank, and the bank is the family, and there was no separation whatsoever. A chance class that I took in high school in economics, and a meeting with a representative from a business college made me interested in pursuing business. So I went off to the US, at Bentley University, where I majored in finance, worked in banking in between, and did my MBA. And all the time, I was much supported from my family and encouraged to do so. in 2006, I was 26 at that time. I came back to Jordan, where I joined the bank as a 26-year-old, a female, a senior manager. No other female had the same title as me when I joined, with responsibility for 5 different departments, and the daughter of the chairman and CEO at the time. So the bank is publicly traded. We had owned a very, very tiny percentage, but it's always been managed by the family since 1930. So I found my passions there. I guess I wasn't super interested still in finance and banking, so I built a branding department, but I was really passionate about creating sustainability and corporate social responsibility functions, as well as the employee volunteering program, and I got involved in many of those activities. Over the 6 years that I spent there, I eventually also became board member of the bank and many of the institutions and nonprofits. And by 2012, that was a big year for me. And I say that for many reasons. One, I was, one of the greatest things, I was nominated as a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum, which was a great honor. And actually, I'm forgetting about the pictures. This is my family, sorry. I got too much into the story.
That's fine.
And I also found myself on the cover of Forbes Middle East as the 3rd most powerful woman in publicly traded companies. So 2012 was a big year for me until, as Mark slightly mentioned, after 82 years of being part of the bank, we all decided to step down. And by all, I mean, by that time, it was my father, my brother, my sister, and myself, who had different positions at the bank, decided to step away. The reasons were conflict of values and the direction of the bank that it was going that just no longer represented what we stood for and what we wanted for the bank. And it was tough. Sorry.
Let's just take 30 seconds and be with you, Dina, okay?
Yeah, I've never spoken about this publicly, so thank you for listening. So it was very tough, especially on my father, who had spent over 2/3 of his life at the bank. And of course, it had become our identity, and I didn't really realize it. So for me, my immediate response was crisis mode. I'm the eldest, and I've always been the one to look after the family and step up and be that responsible person. So for 3 months, that's what I did. We had left Jordan the day after we stepped down. We had some meetings, and we were in Europe, wanted to get away, and had no idea when I would come back home. But we eventually did about a couple months ago, and a couple months after. And 3 months after, in November, was the first time I attended anything public. So I went to a conference, and I remember I didn't know how to introduce myself anymore. And that's when it actually really hit me, because I was in crisis mode before, and I was like really on that energy. And I remember I even shared with Mark, I remember that I think that's the closest I will ever feel to what people who are depressed are. I just remember sinking and feeling sick, not wanting to leave the bed, eating a lot, which I paid for later. I just knew, I decided, I don't know what made me decide, but I just knew I had to remove myself from the situation. Although I really wanted to stay with my family and be there, I just knew it's just not good for me. So I left, I went to Boston where I studied, where I had some good friends, and to get away. And I did end up seeing a therapist, which did not help as therapy, but it helped because I was not able to be vulnerable and share with anyone at that point, because I was the strong one. I was the one in that position and who was representing the family, and I couldn't really share what I was truly feeling. And luckily, I had also signed up to be part of a team from Jordan before all this, who were raising money for the King Hussein Cancer Hospital back home by climbing to Everest Base Camp. So for me, I think that was a savior in some ways because I kept training and working for that. I was not fit whatsoever. I had never been at an altitude and I was super scared of heights. The main reason I decided to join is, of course, it's for a good cause, but I also love challenges. So I was training for that, and for me, that trip really became such a personal journey, and I told myself, if I could do this, I could probably do anything I set my mind to, because it's really, really hard. And it was very hard. Every day was so long and tiring, and every night it was so cold that I wished that the next day would come. And I was sick for 5 days. My stomach was all over the place, but it was also very humbling, and it showed me a different part of the world. I've never been to a country like Nepal. I've never seen people live so simply, and yet they're so happy and always smiling. The women washing their hair in the streets in buckets, and the kids smiling and running around playing with nothing. So that was really a personal journey for me, and it changed my life. So from that, I think I found my strength, and I picked myself up even more. And I said to myself, okay, so what do I want to do now? I've always known that I wanted to make a difference in anything that I do, whether it was through the bank, which I did my best to do, or by myself. So I wanted to create something for myself, and I wanted to be somewhere where no one knew me, because I wanted to start fresh. I kind of wanted to be unknown and build and discover my own identity. So I moved to the US. I'm now in New York, where I'm building my own company focused on financial literacy that Mark mentioned. And I'd started discovering myself more and more. I wanted to share, so this is my dog. His name is Everest. I don't need to explain why. He is white like the mountain, and his personality is 10 times bigger than Everest, for sure. And these are just some pictures of what I'm working on. My first product is focused on girls from as young as 5 years old, and it's based on a curriculum of games and activities that are played at home with their parents. But I also want to end, I don't know how much more time I have.
Yeah.
I'll wrap it up. So I just have 4 points that I want to mention really quickly of what I sort of learned from my journey and what stayed with me. Is that I'm always changing, and I will forever keep discovering and reinventing myself, but my values will always stay the same no matter what. And that I've always wanted to be part of a bigger picture, a bigger purpose, and part of something bigger. And reaching the top for me, so that's also relevant to Everest, and that was what our leader used to always say, who led us up there, is that reaching the top is really half the journey. Is the other half is getting back down safely. And I relate that also to everything that's happened with the bank and the family, that, sometimes you really need to step down from where you are to really step up in a different way. That's more meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina.
I wonder, folks, we've been sitting for over an hour. I wonder, could you stand up for a moment and we can maybe take a stretch? And I know Elton John is in town, but my favorite is Queen. Any of you remember Queen? Okay, well, you can join me in this one. We will rock you. You can do better than that. We will rock you. Last time. We will rock you. Thank you. Okay. I'm ADHD, I tell you. It's been excruciating to sit here without swinging my feet and tapping the table, but what compelling stories, and good morning, and I'm charmed to be here with you, and thank you all for the invitation to join you. I don't have a sad story. I don't have trauma. I don't have drama. I grew up in Newfoundland, which is the easternmost tip of North America. It's a big rock, and I grew up in a rollicking large family with 3 generations. There was always a lap when you were in trouble, and there was always an ear. And I think, when Mark asked me to speak about resilience, the resilience that I learned and my path in life was very much formed, in retrospect, from the days and the minutes and the years spent at home. As an example, my mother was an artist who gave up art when she had children, but she lived every second of life. She used to invite every prisoner who got out of jail. Now, I have to tell you, we didn't have big murderers. There were mainly drunks who were in prison. But the minute they got out of jail, they came to Mrs. Dyer's house for a meal. And whatever child was home would have to sit with our guest. We never knew they were prisoners. We knew they smelled a bit unsavory, but we didn't know that they were prisoners. So there was an inherent respect. The back door, there was a big pile of tuna fish tins and brown paper bags and can openers, so that anybody who was hungry knew they could always come and pick up something at the back door. We thought everybody did that. And then my mother used to take whichever youngster was home after school to deliver clothing, which had been matched by size to the children in the homes where there was abject poverty. We also would deliver coal and food. And the lessons I learned, hard lessons, in that one of the lessons was my mother would always have a cup of tea with whoever the family was, because they would offer her a cup of tea. And the one time we were having tea at the kitchen table, and the cup was filthy, and the place was filthy. And I turned the cup around to drink out of the other side, thinking that I won't get germs. And my mother noticed. Well, believe you me, I got in the car, well, Missy Moo, who do you think you are? And what makes you think you're any different? So I think the respect for dignity of each person in life. My father used to take me to the hospital and to the old age home on Sunday mornings, because in Newfoundland they didn't have a highway to connect all the outports. So if you were in hospital and elderly, you had nobody to visit you. So my father would say to this poor person stuck in the bed, "So Skipper, shall I read with you? Shall I sing with you? Or do you want the little one to give you a song?" And they'd always want the little one to give you a song. And as a shy child, that was very difficult, so I find a way to hide behind the charts on the back of the bed. But all to say, there was a celebration of all lives. And in our home, we had these young girls who would come in from the outports, and they'd come in slim, and they'd get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they'd leave. So my mother said they were coming to help us. But what she did was she invited any of the little girls who got pregnant in their early teens, and they were shunned by the Catholic Church. So she would take them in, but she would respect their dignity and their privacy. So my sister and I loved having big sisters around. So all to say, these experiences, and my grandmother, who was widowed, her husband drowned at sea when she was very young, and my mother was a very young child. The way the law went and the way the rules went and the culture went was that the oldest brother would get everything. So interestingly, my grandmother got nothing. And she had to raise my mother. She was the first person to have a university degree, but nobody wanted to hire her. So she had to set up a sandwich shop, which was directly opposite where the mental health hospital, the mental illness hospital was. And people would break out all the time, and they'd come over and try to break into her place. So she used to sleep with any number of weapons by the bedside. She weighed 90 pounds. But the courage to set that up and to be independent, and my mother would help her. So there was all the way around me wonderful examples of resilience. Nobody spoke about it. My father on Saturday nights would get out the Globe, and we'd have to pick a spot. And whatever spot we picked, he would tell us a little bit about that country. And he spoke a lot of languages, self-taught. And then he'd say, all right, there's drought in that country, or they experience all kinds of disasters, or there's abject poverty. So we will put money in this envelope and we will send it. We'll find out who to send it to. And Mary, you won't be getting your party shoes because there's some little girl who doesn't have any shoes. So we accepted, I guess, that we were part of a big soup and that we'd landed lucky. We weren't rich. My father gave away most of his money. He became the Deputy Minister of Labour because we had no unions and we had no legislation to protect miners, fishers, farmers. So we had the model of social justice bursting out of the seams all around us, although I never heard the word till I left home. But what I learned was that you can make a difference in the world. You're no different, you're no better, we're all the same, and as my mother would say, we're one step away from whoever it was who was vulnerable that we were helping. So I decided very early on that I would be a teacher of the youngest children, because you might have a chance to change the life of a young child by showing them kindness and love, that they would be able to find themselves. And I did that, and it took me 3 days to realize it wasn't up to me, because all these children spoke about my mommy this, my daddy that, even my doggy. You know, they all spoke about their love of the family. And I realized that in that moment, in a puddle of tears, because I thought, how arrogant was I to think that I could do this, 20 years of age. So I realized the most important institution under the stars is the family. It's the bedrock of society. And the next most important institution, in my view, is education. Because in developed countries, children go there for 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's an incredible influence. So I set up my first social, I guess, change was to set up Canada's first parenting centers, where we moved into schools where there were high levels of immigration. And we invited all the families to come with their little tiny children and to be together in community. So you would help them with whatever they identified they needed, and you would set up play-based problem solving for the children. No wind-up toys, just blocks and permission, paint and permission. So that I learned from all those families what it was to be afraid for your life in domestic violence, what child abuse was all about. I never learned that in university. So I learned that peace is not just the absence of war, it's the presence of justice and the absence of fear. And when you work with child abuse and domestic violence, it changes you. So then I realized that I had to do something to break this cycle. And I realized that there was a generational cycle of violence and poor parenting. So I set up Roots of Empathy, and I set it up on the attachment relationship, because I realized in all the violence I was seeing that the common thread was the absence of empathy in all that violence. There weren't monsters, but they didn't have empathy. They didn't have the ability to understand how the other person is feeling and to feel with them. And the other thing I learned at the foot of all these families was that the attachment relationship is where empathy blooms or fades. How able is the mother or the father or whoever is the main person in the family able to let that baby feel loved, to be responding to that baby? And you know, I would see examples where a little toddler would fall down in one of these centers, and the teenage mom would say, no pain, no gain. Don't pick him up, Mary. So I really learned a lot, and the idea of Roots of Empathy was to take the attachment relationship to a classroom of school children so that over the whole year they'd watch how that relationship becomes the first and most important relationship in life and the template for every other relationship. We screened, we only had secure attachment relationships, not the ambivalent, avoidant, and negative, all the other kinds. And we never taught. We coached children to observe. And the whole idea is to ask experiential questions so that every child had a sense of their own power, that we came from intrinsic pride and intrinsic motivation, so there was no praising or criticism, and freed children up to learn and find their voice and speak out. So the research on these programs, I have to say, when aggression and bullying and cruelty went down, it was because empathy went up, and with it along went all the ideas of pro-social behavior. So I'm just going to show you a little clip of the last class of little baby May saying goodbye to the children, because when we run the program, we use a lot of music, we use neuroscience. The children touch the baby, they sing a song at the beginning, they hold the baby's feet or legs, they gaze at the baby's face. And then at the end of the class, the same thing, goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. The children celebrate every milestone of the baby's development in all domains, but they also celebrate the attachment relationship, which is how we all get launched in life. And some of us need a life belt all our lives because we didn't get launched well. Roots of Empathy gives every child a chance to develop empathy. So have we got a little cue for that?
We're getting tight, but I think it's important that we can see this. So let's go for the 2 minutes, and then we'll go let Caroline.
Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you soon. See you soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you very soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you soon. See you soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you very soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you very soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you soon. Goodbye, baby May, we'll see you soon. See you very soon. Goodbye, baby
That's
May,
probably
we'll
enough.
see you soon.
Just to close it off, the children find the humanity in the baby, which allows them then to learn about the baby's feelings and to learn about their own feelings and the feelings of others. We live in an emotionally illiterate world. If we can just become literate with our feelings, we can connect to one another and stop this crisis of connection.
Thank you, Mary. So just before Caroline, you talk. Well, thank you very much, Mary. And we just put a bit of context. We do have 25 minutes left, so we are a bit over what we planned, but we are talking about resilience, aren't we? So actually, rather than hurrying up, I'm going to suggest we do exactly the opposite, and that before listening to you, Caroline, let's just take 30 seconds of silence. Thank you. So after Caroline, we're going to allow you to ask some questions.
Good morning. I'm going to be me. for a second. I've been traveling around for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I'm in the middle of a global campaign. My heart is so open. And so I need to sit on the stage just to feel a little bit more grounded. And I haven't had a lot of sleep, and you can hear the shake in my voice. I'm full of emotion. I'm actually full of both sadness and joy at exactly the same time, which leave me equally vulnerable. It was my father's birthday during the week. He died very unexpectedly 2.5 years ago. His name was Jerry, Big Jerry. He was 6'6" and had size 15 feet, and hands the size of shovels. He was the man who had always told me to be who I was. In this week, I've thought a lot about him and a lot about where I have come. It's very unusual for me to stand out and say, I am really proud of where I am today. I am really proud who I am growing into. And I think he would be really proud of me. I've spent so much of my life trying to be better, trying to be good enough, so that I would be worthy of love, to be valuable, to fix problems, so that I could be lovable. But somehow, in this wonderful menopausal 47, I feel better than I ever have. I'm at the 2.5-year point of grief, excruciating, lonely grief. And though I had lost people before my father, nothing prepared me for the absence of him. But grief broke my heart open so hugely, and it has allowed me to spurt and grow again. It's in my father's passing that I found the courage to do something I had always wanted to do, which was to launch a global campaign for disability inclusion. It was only as he was dying and he was saying, "What are you waiting for?" that I realized he was right. I had a career of nearly 20 years of disability business inclusion attached to this identity of inspirational blind girl. I had got so tired and with it, I had been hiding, oddly, a whole load of personal parts of my life, just keeping up the front of being a change maker, a hero social entrepreneur, an innovator, when inside, actually, I was nearly internally crumbling. I had had a marriage that had imploded very, very dramatically, leaving me bankrupt and also very, very bruised. So when he turned to me and said, "So what are you waiting for?" What did I tell you? Be yourself and screw the bastards. I went, okay. Because I imagined what it would be like to die and not try. So let me get the whole blind inspirational story out of the way for a second here. I did a TED Talk in 2010, and the story of how Caroline Casey got to here is, very simply, I was born with ocular albinism. I am registered blind. I can't see you, hence I'm sitting down here to feel you better. My parents made a decision to bring me up as a sighted child and not tell me. And I found out by accident at 17, when my father gave me a driving lesson. And you can laugh at that because it is ridiculous. For those of you who are parents, why would you do that? Now the thing is, I didn't know, I didn't see, and I had had dreams to be Mowgli from the Jungle Book and a cowgirl and to race cars and motorbikes. That's why I wear the wings on my back. Anyway, that's the story. When I found out it, the doctor turned to my mother and said, "Why didn't you know? Why didn't I know that?" And when I found out, really like what Dina is saying, the identity of who I was, I didn't want that identity. And so I did my first act of conscious discrimination, and I hid my identity about having a disability for 11 years. And I did it fabulously. I really need to tell you, beyond my hands, you are all blurry. I am significantly visually impaired, but I don't look it. because they taught me how to look you in the eye, to feel your heart, and to decide on a person by how your gut feels. And I hit it so successfully right through business school. By the way, I started my career off as an archaeologist, which is ridiculous for somebody who's visually impaired. Then I went to business school, and then I went to Accenture, and the manager of a consultancy firm employed a blind person, and they never knew. I don't know what that says about that. But at 28 years old, I came out of the closet and finally said, I am me. Maya Angelou tells a story. There is no greater agony than an untold story inside you. So let me just explain to you, that is the blind inspirational girl story. Because when I came out of the closet, I went across India on an elephant, as one does, becoming Mowgli from the Jungle Book, and suddenly I got a platform, a blind albino girl, you know, riding elephants. You can imagine what that might create. A story. So what I was obsessed by, though, is I had been introduced to the disability inequality crisis in the world, and I chose to use that platform to make amends for my own discrimination against my tribe. There are 1.3 billion people in the world who have a disability, but it will touch every single one of you. If I was to ask each of you to put your hand up if you plan to grow old, please do. I can't see you, but do it. Because if that's the case, you will touch disability. 90% of our children who have a disability don't get an education. You're 50% more likely to experience poverty, 50% less likely to get a job. We design more clothes for dogs than we do for people with disabilities. Disability exclusion costs our countries up to 7% of our GDP. So why at this huge scale of a problem have we never been able to fix it? Or have we never felt the huge leadership behind other issues? And for me, Mary, I completely agree with education is a huge institution. But one institution or one ecosystem that has been very much part of the inequality crisis is business. If business does not see the value and worth of 1.3 billion people in the world as consumers and suppliers and talent and members of the community, there's no way we're ever going to fix this. No government or charity alone can. This is our issue. It's not about them or thee or us. This is ours. And so after I got off that elephant, my job was to make business see our value. The story of the blind girl, this inspirational blind girl, has served to bring story and to get me platform, but I'm fed up of her. So as Dina was so honest, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm tired of just being the inspirational blonde Irish blind girl. I'm not her. I really amn't. Do you know what? I've survived so much more in my life, so much more unspeakable trauma and abuse, but I choose not to make that my story. What I choose is surviving that and how I've survived it, to force and courage and let my heart open for the energy to position disability equally in our world. Not because I think disability is more important, but because I know what it's like not to belong. I know what it's like not to be seen, and I know what it's like not to be heard. If we could see that disability is only an impairment and it's society that disables us just because we come out different, and we open our hearts to that, wouldn't that be bloody magnificent? Yes, it would. Because not one of us is defined by any tiny part of ourselves or several pieces of us. We grow and learn every day. We screw up and we thrive. And that's the excitement of where I am now. Goodbye, elephant girl. Hello, woman. Hello, woman. So I'm going to finish up. Thank you. And I don't mind crying, but I'm going to finish up by saying the reason I'm so proud of myself is after his death, I did launch that global campaign. I wanted to create the uncomfortable truth, like Al Gore's inconvenient truth, and go out and find 500 Sheryl Sandbergs and Paul Pomans, the biggest CEOs in the world, to change this. No more excuses. No more we choose LGBTQ over gender and we choose gender over race. That is insane to categorize inclusion, to pit humanity against each other. And I'm sorry for you CEOs that it's hard to lead right now, but there is an inclusion revolution coming on, and you do have to be the leaders of that. And so I launched the Valuable 500 in Davos this year against all the odds when everybody told me I couldn't. And that is to get 500 leaders, CEOs around the world to commit to putting this on their leadership agenda with their head and their heart, with their head and their heart. And I'm going back to Davos in 2020 with 501 if it's the last thing I do. I want to end by saying a few things that I've learned and known is none of us are defined by this moment, this story, this stage, this role, this position, this failure, this marriage breakup. Not at all. Because I'm here, I have never been in the best place in my life because somewhere in that audience is my husband who I am marrying on the 20th of July. Again, because we ran away and did it quietly after my dad died. So, Hagar, we are just finished building a home together after I lost everything I ever owned and only held a piece of cutlery. And I have found my voice, not as a girl, but as a woman. The second thing I want to say is you can feel love and pain at the same time. They're the two wings. I think it's the juxtaposition between the yin and the yang is where that potent beauty comes from. The heart and the head and the heart, the soft and the strong. My God, isn't it great? And very lastly, you see these sparkly wings on my back. I dare us to dare them, all the leaders in their place, to use those hearts, because the wings of transformation are about patience and struggle. They are, and that's okay. And to live and to be brave is to find failure all the time. That's okay. No judgment, and we find ourselves judging, just take that judgment back and be kind. And the wings may have a short expanse, but right between wings is a heart. And you know what? The beating of a heart is infinite. And if this sounds hippie, I'm sorry, but nothing is stronger than heart and love. It will beat it all. But we all have to use our hearts, every single one of us, and our voice and our truth. Because this is the time for a heart revolution. Thank you.
People are standing up for you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Caroline, for being so open and honest with us, because I know that you've gone beyond what you've shared. And, you started. So thank you, and the timing has taken another reality on this panel, but I want to trust that it's right, the way it's happening, and it's happened, which means that the 2 or 3 questions you're going to have are going to be precious, because we're not going to have much more time for 2 or 3. And again, rather than jumping into the questions and taking them quickly, let's do the opposite. Let's just take some time. You're only going to be 2 or 3 of you to ask a question. So I'd like to ask you to really ask yourselves how important it is for you to ask a question to them, to one of them. And for the first one who wants to ask the question can lift up their hand. And I appreciate the time you're taking. And there's one question. If the microphone can be Nick, or yeah, the microphone is coming.
For all of you, finally, do you love yourself?
So, finally, do you love yourself? That was your question yesterday about loving ourselves, and you'd like to hear them about how they love them themselves today. Who would like to? That was easy. So, could you, the microphone down here for. Thank you.
It seems that you all have a heart and a soul and you feel positive. You've all been through trauma. That's odd. So, do we need trauma to get to this position? It's strange that we don't have a team of 5 people who were brought up in a loving, wonderful family with luck. So that interests me.
Okay, so actually we do have one of them. We do have one of them who actually, but I understand that your question is actually, well, having gone through this trauma and being happy people, there's something more you'd like to understand here, which actually is the definition of resilience, which is how can you rebound after trauma or deep suffering. So who would like to say something about, because of course there could be a very general answer given, but you could also give your answer to this journey between suffering and joy with the time we have.
Maybe just let me say something. I think it's discouraging if people think that you have to suffer in order to do art or to do change. Because the reality is most people in the world don't have spectacular stories, but they can make spectacular impact. So they say that an artist, to have great celebrity, must come from a place of pain. Well, we're not all Edith Piaf. But I think we can all make beautiful harmony.
And one thing I want to add to that, I think it's absolutely the best question. Joy is being vulnerable, right? And actually it's really hard because you've got to release and let go. Some of the most resilient people I know haven't got the big backstories and traumas because they've the confidence to keep going when they fall down.
Another question. The microphone's coming just there.
Hi, thank you, really inspired. My name is Oli, I'm Icelandic, I'm a storyteller, ex-athlete. Yeah, maybe 2 parts. First, kind of a statement regarding the kids and this separation of ours and the depth that we're always speaking of, that we're all seeking. I think we need to create education system and community which doesn't take us adults so far into the separation. I've had my experience, like shamanic experiences and all that, and the shift I think that is really important is that we go from thinking that the energy, the Atman, the God, the Yahweh, the Rod, the Inua, the Wakantanka, the energy, the consciousness, that it has somehow abandoned us and separated itself from us, and instead presenting to the children at young age that they are this consciousness only dreaming and on purpose escaping its oneness, its loneliness, by playing that it's not the one, and that it's a cosmic joke, and that it's a cosmic necessity, this beautiful, what we call separation, but it's only, you are it, you are the secret, only dreaming that you're not the secret. So, and that invites the play, and that takes the fear out of the equation, which also is, of course, a necessity. And raindrops and sunshine create a rainbow. So a way to do that is to look at the children and see that they are the world. They don't, when they look at the world, they don't see the world as something separate from themselves. They are the world. There is no fear in that. And we come to them at age of 4, 5, 6, 7, and we say, hey, okay, you've experienced the world as yourself now, but we have more important information here. And that creates the separation. So we need to present to the children that we are only their own mirror, and we need to teach children emotional responsibility, glow responsibility, and response ability. So the ability to respond and know that the world is always their reflection. So
Could you thank you for sharing
sorry.
this? We're going to have to close, and I would like to respect when you said you had a question. Do you have a short question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, could you elaborate on this for me, please?
2 minutes before the end. Well, at least you open an interesting question. Thank you. But maybe, who would like to maybe have you to share anything about what you just heard, what was said?
Thank you. Maybe, I think we all concur with you, the children aren't just part of the future, they're 100% of the future. So loving them well and storying them well probably will make for a good future.
I know I overtalk, but to the point of children and to your question, we have to help our generations know it's okay to feel pain. You don't have to have the big trauma. It could be simply the disappointment that the boy didn't want to kiss you. And it's building that acceptance that life is up and down and letting our children realize that they're accountable for their lives. That's, I think, what resilience, because we don't have to have big stories to feel pain.
Thank you. And maybe I'll allow myself to just say something to close the loop of this session with what you were sharing and asking, is that Boris Cyrulnik started talking to us about attachment in terms of our childhood and our safe parents or environments. And maybe through the spiritual evolution we're going through and these new generations, who are becoming so aware about emotions, about how we're thinking, how we're interacting, that there's another form of attachment that as human beings we're going to be learning, and that there is indeed a space where we can attach with security, which is maybe beyond our relations, and which is something we all have access to. So I'd like to thank you so much, and just before we're going into thanking you all together, just to go through another little moment of silence of gratitude towards you. Thank you for having shared so much of who you are and being yourselves. Thank you.